Welcome back to another episode of our Clean Sailors podcast. I'm your host, Holly, founder of Clean Sailors. Let's get started. Good morning, sir.
Morning to you, Holly.
How are you?
Pretty good, I think. Pretty good.
Are you sitting comfortably?
I'm perfectly comfortable.
Then let's begin. Now, this sailor and podcast guest needs no introduction, but he deserves one. Sir Robin Knox-Johnston made history in 1968-69 as the first person to sail solo and non-stop around the world, an achievement that secured his legendary status in the sailing world and beyond. He then co-founded Clipper Ventures alongside William Ward and established the Clipper Round the World yacht race in 1996, transforming ocean racing by making it accessible to everyday people with no previous sailing experience very often. Through the Clipper race, he has introduced thousands and thousands of people to offshore racing, an accomplishment that I imagine you consider, Robin, one of your greatest achievements. Beyond founding Clipper, Sir Robin, your personal sailing achievements are just as extraordinary. At 68, you became one of the oldest yachtsmen to complete a solo round-the-world voyage again in the ocean race in 2007, finishing fourth, winning the Jules Verne Trophy with Peter Blake in 1994. Very exciting story behind that. I'm sure we'll dive into it. And in that, circumnavigating the planet in just under 75 days aboard the catamaran Enza, New Zealand, and finishing third in the Route du Rhum solo transatlantic race in 2014, proving that your competitive fire and seamanship remained well undimmed even after all those adventures. Robin, you've had a very busy year. Let's start with Greenland. How was that?
Our objective was to get to Greenland before Mr. Trump.
I think you succeeded in the end, as you often do.
I think he got distracted by invading California. Yeah, it was a great trip because the people who came with me were people I'd sailed with over many, many years, in some cases over 40 years. And so it was old friends, but well-tried seamen. And I think, although we had problems with the boat, things went wrong, and this, I'm afraid, happens with boats. Really, the atmosphere on board was always great. And of course, Greenland's an exciting place because you can never tell when the ice is going to disperse enough to let you in. And sometimes you can get in by just pushing it to one side very gently. And other times you just say, whoops, we're not going to get through that lot. We better find somewhere else or go and hover off. But it is challenging. It's not well surveyed. I mean, on one occasion I was going up a field there and found, according to my GPS, I was halfway up a mountain. Clearly, I knew I was in the middle of the field, but the problem is, of course, in the days when they were trying to survey this, they only had basic equipment. They couldn't see an horizon, which you need with the use of a sextant. So, you just say, well, we just be a little bit cautious. We're not going to go too fast. We don't know when there's an uncharted rock there, and if we hit that, that could be nasty. Like hitting ice, I mean, it's floating rock. It'll knock a hole in your boat. So just take it rather gently. But I think the thing I love about Greenland is it's unspoilt. It is one of the last wildernesses. Many people, especially on the East Coast, there's only about 3,000 people. Most of those are in one town, Tesseract. There's a very small village 4 degrees north of the Arctic Circle in Scoresby Sound, the biggest field in the world, which I have visited. I think it's got 250 inhabitants. Most of the year round, it's just totally isolated. There is a small airfield, but it's about 20 miles from the village. And it's just absolutely beautiful because no one's touched it. And I think you come alive in those circumstances because you can't fully relax. You're always watching out for the ice or watching out the survey or making sure you're safe. Every day is different. The wind can change and the ice will move. And then you've got to extricate yourself somehow. And I think that sort of challenge is something that brings you to life. It's living.
That's incredibly beautifully put. I often find personally with sailing, certainly if you're on your own, it forces you to be incredibly present. I think that's why it has at times become an escapism for me, beyond just a passion or a sort of pastime. But you're right, I can't imagine yet being in a situation where you're surrounded almost by such opportunity for adversity, let's say, such as being in the middle of an ice field. It forces a different kind of reality, doesn't it? You're not just being present, you're being I imagine you're sort of electrically alive and alert to to so much of the movement and sound around you, as well as that of your own boat.
That's very well put. That's true.
Let's go back to the very beginning, Robin, because we will come back to your northern sailing and in particular some of the adventures that you've set up for others. But it would be remiss of me not to start at the beginning, not least because I'm sitting here in Falmouth talking to you in Portsmouth. And from here, I can see Pendennis Point, which I appreciate you know pretty well. But you had plenty of experience of open ocean by the time you formally set out alone on Suhaili, 1968, for the Sunday Times Golden Globe race. I guess a key factor or difference of being on that open ocean, again, was the fact that you were alone. And in that respect, I imagine those same oceans must have looked and felt truly vast and untamed and a true wilderness. What did the sea mean to you back then, and how does it feel different today?
Well, I think you've got to bear in mind, I went to sea professionally when I was 17 years old in the Merchant Navy. One of my better decisions, I have to say, because the training as an apprentice in the Merchant Navy was fantastic. It did turn out seaman. And I learned so much that was helpful to me later on in life when I started sailing. And it was whilst based out east, my company had over half its fleet based in, well, east of Suez. I served for 4 years going from Bombay to Basra. And that was very romantic in those days because only Kuwait had a port once you left Karachi. Everywhere else you anchored until you got to Basra. And we were still taking people from India to go work in Arabia and Kuwait and elsewhere. And they'd camp on the decks. So we carried 700 of these people on really a comparatively small ship. And they'd be cooking away there, chatting away there, got their families there. It was romantic. And you very quickly learned who were easy to deal with. For instance, the easiest people to deal with were the Bedouin. Absolute gentlemen, never gave you any trouble. You were polite to them, they were polite back. Somalis weren't allowed on the ships because they'd knifed some of the officers on the sister ship on one occasion. One was killed. And so we didn't take Somalis. Others, they varied a bit. Some could be very arrogant. Some could be very charming. It depended. We had Arabs, Indians, Pakistanis. We had a huge mix on board. And I think we had a crew of about 100, most of whom were Indians or Pakistanis or Goanese, and about 18 of us Brits, and very quickly got the feel of it. So whilst out there, sailing with a friend who'd been on the cadet ship with me, my company had a ship where they took all the crew off, managed entirely with cadets. And that was why we got such a good training. And we were together on one of the Gulf boats, and we asked a dhow late at night. We were handing over the watch, and we said, wouldn't it be fun to build a boat and sail home when we finish our time out here? And that grew into the idea of building a dhow and sailing it home. And then I wrote to Alan Villiers and said, look, we got this idea. He sent me an absolutely charming 3-page letter back. I wish I could find, really taking the trouble to bother with, I think, apart from anything else. Just saying, don't do that. You'll never get your money back. If you can, build a yacht. So we looked for plans, got these plans, wrong ones, looked at the boat, thought she looked seaworthy. Let's build that anyway. We're running out of time. And that's really the beginning of Suhaili. And we built her in Bombay in the docks there. And the other two dropped out at one stage. So I say recruited my brother. I sort of told him he was coming. And another friend. And we set off from Bombay via Arabia, East and South Africa, and then non-stop from Cape Town to London. And that's really when I realized that I could sail the boat on my own. Furthermore, with that 77-day trip, I had a very good idea of how to provision it and what I might need on board. So at the end of that, got Suhaili home, went back to sea. I was first officer on a liner called the Kenya. And I saw Chichester come back. And I thought, he stopped once. He's one thing to do it non-stop. So I wrote to 50 companies saying I got this brilliant idea and would they like to back me. And of course, they all wrote back and said no. Wasn't a total disaster. Cadbury's gave me a £5 voucher, and tenants gave me much more usefully 120 cans of beer. But that was the limit of my sponsorship. And so I did it really on an overdraft. And I planned to go. Plenty of people told me I couldn't do it. I thought that was stupid. You don't know me. Or it was impossible. I said, well, everything's impossible till you try it. And I felt rather sorry for them, really. Someone said, did it spur you on? No, because I was pretty confident. I said,
Mm.
if it's possible, I think I've got the right boat. I know the boat. I helped build it. I've sailed it 20,000 miles. I'm a master mariner. Um, I've been captain of a merchant ship by this time. I felt, look, if anyone's got a chance of doing this, I have. It may not be possible, but now I've thought of it, I really got to go and try. And so off I went.
I think speaking to you over dinner on this topic and listening to you verbalize it was an incredible experience, because at the time I thought how both refreshing and also how almost like the audacity, but in a very, very well founded sense of having that utter confidence in yourself. And then, of course, listening to you now and describe how you'd already done the 7,000 miles back from India in your homemade boat, effectively, Suhaili. Of course, you could do it. I mean, of course, you could. But I think it's that uniqueness of the self realization of that, because I think there's many who can but don't. So there's another component or another couple of components piled on top of that self-confidence, let's say, and proven experience that gave you this extra gumption. Presumably it's Robin's own gumption juice that gave you that extra topping of just, it has to be done and I'm going to be the person to do it.
Well, I think if you asked me before I set out, am I going to achieve it? I mean, people did. I said, I don't know. I'm going to try. I'm asking a boat and a human to sail twice as far as anyone's ever sailed before. I mean, I remember a journalist saying, how are you going to manage on your own? I said, I don't know. But if I've come back in 2 weeks, I haven't. But, every day you progress, and after a month, you're having a bad day. You think, oh, why am I doing this? And you say, well, wait a minute. I've got no right today to let down the me who's got me this far. And therefore, we'll just take this day easy and we'll see how we feel tomorrow. And that actually became about once a month. I say, I'm having a day off. I mean, you can't have a day off completely. But
Mhm.
I'd say, no, today I'm just going to keep the boat comfortable and I'm going to read books and do something like that. And I would. And the result was, of course, by the next day I was fired up and did about 3 days' work because I'd had to relax. Quite useful lesson to learn in life, actually. And so you just keep going. And of course, once the radio broke down, it was really hard to. I used to worry about the family, worrying where I was, but nothing much I could do about it. And I'd come this far, I was going to carry on. So, 2 months after the radio packed up, I suddenly appeared off Australia. Pointed my phone to a pilot vessel, said, I'm fine. What are you doing? Carrying on. The funniest thing was talking to the pilot vessel. He said, where are you heading, mate? I said, well, I'm going to head towards New Zealand. And he said, what, across the Tasman Sea? I said, well, yes. He said, bloody hell, mate, you be careful. That's a bloody dangerous place. He wasn't the least impressed with the fact that I'd sailed all the way from England as far as Australia. As far as he was concerned, the Tasman Sea was the dangerous bit. Well, I managed to survive it. And then so I sailed into the blue. I mean, no one knew where I was for 4.5 months.
It's really huge. I have to say, I'm just reflecting on something you said there about who you to let down, the person that you got to be who you are today. I think is a really quite beautiful way of understanding the cumulative, or how cumulative our experience is. And actually all of those times that, whether it's you or I or everyone listening to this conversation, you've got to where you are today because of all of that time. So don't let all of that down. Don't let all of your previous selves down, and actually all of your future selves to come, in a way. And I think it's something that can be easily lost. And I haven't yet sailed around the world solo, Robin, and I have to say it's not probably on my hit list. But in those kind of extreme circumstances in particular, where you're both mentally and physically challenged and emotionally challenged, spiritually challenged, probably too, that comes home to roost, I imagine, greater than ever.
Well, in a way, I mean, I was doing what I did for a living, only I'm on a sailing boat, not a big powered vessel. I mean, I'm navigating just the same way. Bear in mind, there were no satellites in those days, so we had no GPS. But, what's my job? I'm used to navigating with a sextant, so that's not a problem. Doing the maintenance around the boat, I was well trained. I felt I know this boat inside out, back to front. Really, I think there was only one other person who entered that of the 9 of us who set off. I felt probably was as experienced as me when he actually came down to it, and that was the Frenchman Bernard Matessier. And in the end, of course, neither of us knew where the other was anyway. We got back, we discovered I was still 3 weeks ahead of him at Cape Horn, but we didn't know that at the time. I was up there in front of him somewhere, and I knew he was somewhere behind me, or I hoped he was behind me. Perhaps he's overtaken me. I don't know. Well, I've got to press on in case. And it came as quite a surprise when I discovered actually he pulled out. I didn't expect that, I have to say.
Do you think then, based on the fact that you had such, by all accounts, exceptional experience, you described obviously going into this apprenticeship at 17 with the Merchant Navy, you'd had a couple of fun boat builds as a young boy, which I understand both sank, but we'll skip over that part, and had obviously built your own boat, Suhaili. Was perhaps the biggest challenge for you then, on an individual level, that element of solitude? Because in all of those contexts, it's collegiate. You're particularly in the forces or otherwise, you're surrounded by others, and there's a big focus on organization and structure and teamwork. This was just you.
That's a good point. I mean, in fact, solitude didn't bother me. I had a job to do, and I just focused on the job. You think what you do is just to sit there back in the cockpit drinking gin and tonics. Well, you don't. You've got far better things to do. You've got a boat to worry about. You've got to make sure you're on the right course. You're looking at the weather. And we had no weather information. So weather information came from a barometer, the clouds and the wind direction. And you worked out what's likely to happen with that. And if the blast dropped rather rapidly, as it did quite often in the roaring forties in the Southern Ocean, you said, well, there's something big coming. I better get the boat ready,
Uh-huh.
to get it comfortable, make sure you checked everything was lashed properly. That's your priority. Survival. You're on the boat survival. If the boat survives, you'll survive. But it was just keeping that boat in one piece, really, and looking after it.
I think, but that's a step up again, isn't it? Solitude is one challenge, and one can be very comfortable on one's own, but you're in a context in which you are, as you're describing, surviving. You were somewhat cruelly knocked down, if I remember, at 4 days off Cape of Good Hope, or 4 days off rounding the Cape of Good Hope, and knocked down quite badly. And your autopilot then failed near Australia, and you were hand steering for long stretches. That's not solitude. That's the survival and maintaining that sort of mental strength when systems failed, thousands of miles from help, appreciating you've got all the confidence in your world, in your actual skills and experience. But survival is a different level. How did you, or even reflecting back on it now, did you just keep going aside from that, completing it, not letting yourself down, and thinking about your lemon meringue pie and your warm bed back on land somewhere? Do you look back at yourself and just think, yeah, that was pretty cool. That was really tough.
I didn't think about it like that. Off New Zealand, I met some fishermen and a journalist who phoned out to talk to me. And I knew I got the lead. That's too much to give up. I've already sailed further than anyone ever has, non-stop. And I've got the lead. This is within my grasp. If I can just survive getting around Cape Horn, get back into the Atlantic where it's much more straightforward.
Mhm.
And so I thought, I'm not giving up. There's too much at stake here. I might beat Matessier. At that time, he was 4 weeks behind me. I don't know, but if I press on, I'll make it harder for him. And who knows, he might get into difficulties. So I just thought, I'm not giving up now. I've come this far. I'm not sure this is in my grasp yet. It certainly won't be if I pull out. I've got too much to lose by pulling out.
Mm-hmm. Pure competitive strength, then, Robin, as well as mental and physical.
At school, the only sport I was good at for the school was boxing. And I was in the team every year I was there. But you very quickly learn in boxing, don't come second.
Lest you have that flattened nose.
I would have, they didn't enough.
Exactly. I mean, I can see the thought process behind that. Second is a tricky spot to be, bit like America's Cup, as you appreciate. But since that, Robin, and as I said, it's obviously incredibly poignant to be sitting here. There's Falmouth is somewhere that you've known quite well, and your footprints are on our quay down by the waterside. How did you then pivot into offshore sort of sailing and racing yourself with others? Because that also is another step, let's say, to, the Jules Verne and being on Enza, and then obviously Enza New Zealand after her fix. What was it that you weren't quite ready to give up with offshore round the world racing, but actually became more interesting when you then did it with others?
Well, after I got back, I was fairly busy for a while, but my company disappeared, basically. It was absorbed by P&O, and I didn't want to do that.
Uh-huh.
I was a British India man, and so I decided I'd leave the sea then, professionally. And I started building a marina on the Hamble. But, I was watching the racing circuit, and I thought, hmm. And then Max Aitken, who owned the Express newspaper, invited me to join him for a season. And that was really well, no, I'd already done the two-handed round Britain race. But that's a different sort of sailing, short-handed sailing. Racing I was doing with Max was fully crewed stuff. We were out racing every weekend, sometimes across the channels or something like that, but we were racing whatever happened. And I thought, this is bloody marvelous. I mean, I love this. This is such fun. So I carried on doing it, and a very good friend of mine, Robin Asia, decided to go for the Admiral's Cup in 73, so I joined his crew. 74 round Britain race again. We won that with the biggest racing catamaran at the time, then British Oxygen. And then 75 Admiral's Cup again, but they dropped a spinnaker pole on my head, slipped a disc, so I was out of it for that. 76, racing again, won the Royal Ocean Racing Club Class 1 Points Championship. 77, Whitbread race, and it just went on and on. And those were my really competitive years. I was loving it. I was enjoying it. Every race you learn something. I was sailing with some extremely good sailors, Olympic medalists, learning an awful lot from them about some finer points of tuning a boat. And it all helped me become a better racer. But I think in a way that also makes you a better seaman. And at the end of the day, as I say with all my clipper crews, first and foremost, you're going to be a seaman. You're going to be safe at sea. Once you've got that, you'll want to race. It's in the human instinct. You'll want to race. But let's turn you into someone who's safe to race first. And that's really the philosophy behind clipper training.
Very much behind the clipper training. I think one of the most extraordinary things about clipper, which obviously after various accolades that you're describing and your super competitive streak, super competitively, successfully competitive streak, you did go on to found Clipper Ventures effectively, and in that you've taken nearly 10,000, certainly thousands, if not 7,000 people around the world, or various legs of it, and in some ways democratizing sailing, more certainly ocean racing. Why was that important to you in Clipper? Why was giving more people access to that offshore racing environment something that you thought had to happen?
I think the problem is that the media have the view that yachting is a very expensive sport. Actually, it isn't. I mean, the average price for a caravan in this country is more than the average price of a boat. And as I said to a young lady on the breakfast program, when she said to me, well, it's elitist, I said, what, like driving? She said, what do you mean? I said, people out there with the Rolls Royces, that's elite. Ever been to a sailing club? Buy a boat for 800 quid? Oh, she said. But I love my sailing, and I really wanted it to be possible for everyone to do it. This combined with, I was sailed to Greenland with Chris Bonington. We went climbing a mountain there. And he was telling me how much it cost to climb Mount Everest. I thought, it's quite expensive. In memory, I think it was about £40,000 in those days. And this is, gosh, yeah, over 30 years ago, 35 years ago.
Huge.
I wonder the sailing equivalent to sail around the world. How much would it cost if I were to put the boats together, pay the skippers, organize the ports, feed them, clothe them? How much would I have to charge? At that time, it was just over half what it costs to climb Mount Everest. And I thought, must be loads of people out there who would love to do it, but don't have a boat, or if they've got a boat, haven't got the confidence. Well, let's put an advert in the newspaper and see what happens. 1,000 responses. We thought, William and I thought, we better do this. We've thought of it now. We don't do it, someone else will. So that was the first Tipper race in 1996, and we've had 14 since. Well, we're on the 14th now. And it's about 7,000 people who've at least crossed an ocean with us. But they have to do 4 weeks training. And I don't care what experience they've got. They do our training because it's designed to make everyone do things the same way and use the same expressions. So at night, there's a storm brewing, you've got to change a headsail, it's dark, waves coming over the boat. Everyone on that boat knows what the person up front is doing because they've done it. That's what the training's all about. It's making people aware of what they might face up to. And some will turn around after a week or so of training and say, sorry, it's not for me. You try and find out why not. You say, are you sure? Do you want to go a bit further and just see? But it's not many who drop out. All of them have made a decision to do it. And then I think it's up to us and my team to train them properly
Mm,
and keep that enthusiasm running,
mm,
keep them wanting to do this. Ultimately say to them, well, you've done 4 weeks training. That doesn't mean you're fully trained. You're going to be learning every day you're out there. Bear that in mind. Never think arrogantly. I mean, it's a crazy thing people say, I've beaten the sea, I've beaten the ocean. That's ridiculous. You never beat the ocean. It doesn't notice you. But just say, look, always bear in mind that the sea is much more powerful than we are. You've got a good boat, you've got some good people on board with you, but just be aware.
mm,
And if you feel a little bit worried about what's coming up, that's perfectly normal. Don't worry about it. You'll learn as you go along. And I look at the crews who've gone all the way around the world at the end, and I realize the huge change it's made in them. You see that inner self-confidence because you've got to be so self-sufficient at sea. You know, in the middle of the ocean, there's no shops, repair works. Anything goes wrong with the boat, you've got to fix it. We try and instill that into people and say, this is seamanship. This is how to get a boat across the ocean. This is what you're going to learn. Now, it's then up to you to pick that up and follow through. And occasionally people don't, and I'll say, look, I don't think you're going to do it, or you won't be right in the crew. Sorry, bye-bye.
mm,
I don't think you're going to enjoy it.
mm,
You might upset a crew otherwise. Your attitude's wrong. And I have thrown people out for that
mhm.
because I've got to think of the majority.
Absolutely, and very fair. I think also when you're describing people who've come home, and I've got many friends and others who have completed clipper legs or around the worlders, and you can understand how they've come back changed, certainly to the person that they went into it as. But I think the understanding is, despite a huge achievement in some respects, is also because, 40% of people who sign up to Clipper are complete amateurs when it comes to, let's say, sailing, and certainly for offshore racing, it's quite remarkable that that's obviously an achievement, and they're trained to the degree that they are with Clipper in order to get, to get that sort of passage done safely. But I think it's less a point of arrogance than an achievement, certainly from the people I know, and I can understand and rationalize it. It's that degree of humility as well. And you'll know this perhaps more than anybody, but certainly when you're offshore racing, you're with people and you see everything of each other. It's a very humanizing experience being in a tiny space in all conditions, conducting your everyday human functions and otherwise, um, around people that, for the first part, you don't know. And obviously by the end of it, you know them a lot better. But I think there's a degree of also why it's not for everybody. And I can see also why people drop out. I remember being on CV11 myself last year, even just heading up to the Western Isles, and the reality of being in that context for some people who were thinking about doing Clipper became too much because, you don't have the safety of your normal bedtime routines, or, a firm toilet door, or somebody else to clean the house for you. Everyone is the same. Obviously, there's the hierarchy, which is also important for safety, but it's a very, very humanizing experience. And I think that, I imagine, is probably one of the biggest factors of change to a person who undertakes certainly Clipper, but also offshore racing in general. And sailing does certainly bring that home to me when you're in a much more confined space, and yet the biggest space that we know on the planet, of course. Everything is simplified to such a degree with an alarming sort of crystalline clarity that it's very moving. It does change you, I think. And so I can see how affecting the Clipper race has been and will continue to be for thousands and thousands of people.
Yes, I think really interesting. You get an 18-year-old coming who's, say, got a gap year and decides, or the parents decide, well, you're not going to get into trouble. You're going to go into the Clipper race. And they arrive, they're 18, and we train them up. And by the way, the easiest ones to train are the ones who've not sailed before because they've no bad habits.
Mhm.
Like what to get out of them. But you take an 18-year-old, and a year later, they're 24. They've matured so much.
Mm.
We saw this. We took 8 kids from Soweto in one race. In fact, we've done it twice. No future. Absolutely not. Living in a township in Africa, it was useless. Some couldn't read and write. the end of they each did one leg. One of them now then decided they're going to go to university. They're now working for the UN in New York.
Wow.
Oh, bright girl. The first black in South Africa did a yachtmaster's ticket, one of those, and so on. And Hull, we did this with the city, and we set up a scheme. We took these kids, 10 of them, 100% success. They all came back and went on to further education, all got jobs. It's quite remarkable. I think some of it's due to the fact they might be up on the foredeck and water's coming over, and they're 18, 19, and probably never done anything like this in their lives. And they're up there with someone in their 50s who's perhaps a senior executive in a company. And they'll say, but I'm as good as them on the foredeck. Maybe I'd be as good as them in life. And it sort of opens their minds to realize there is another better life. And here's my opportunity to start it. And Cat Zero in Hull has been incredibly successful. 75% success rate. Been going for 15 years and still does. Taking these kids from the poor deprived areas and just giving them a glimpse of what life could be like and showing them, here's the opportunity. You can do it now.
One of the most pertinent points in that, Robin, is that obviously is that Clipper originally was set up to give ordinary people the opportunity to do extraordinary things, as you've said in your own words. And perhaps the most rewarding aspect of it, even observing your journey within Clipper, is that it has then gone on to grow on to be more than just a race for those ordinary people. And obviously now it's a platform for marine science, environmental partnerships, and importantly for giving back to society. I mean, you've raised over 1.5, 1.6 million for UNICEF as you've also gone along. So how deliberate was that evolution for you? And what do you think about that second tertiary order impact that Clipper is having beyond the initial crew that you're taking on board to train and race around the world? How deliberate was it?
Well, I'd love to say it was deliberate, but in fact, I mean, when we did the first race, we were so focused on just achieving it. And then we realized we got these boats after the first race. What do we do with them? We better do it again.
Mhm.
So it slowly grew on us. And when we got Hull and Humber involved, that really was a bit of a breakthrough because the city got right behind it. Some of these children had cost $250,000 from the welfare and everything else. And we just turned them round. We said, well, this is something we'd like to do more of. So now, when we get a port or city sponsoring a boat, I mean, we've taken 140 Chinese now from Qingdao, and they've gone back to China to teach sailing or to go sailing, but it's opened their eyes. That's a particularly successful program that's still going on. But it happens with everything. You can take these people, take them out of their ordinary environment, which is probably not a very good one, or with not much hope, and say, you can have hope. And I think in many ways, watching that change in them and following their progress subsequently is perhaps the most rewarding part of it.
I think on a higher order as well, no less important, perhaps equally so, is that relationship between adventure, commerce, conservation, truly sailing, forgive the pun, in the same direction is quite potent because it is beyond its original intention of being a sailing race and giving people the opportunity to do something extraordinary. And I too have heard, countless times over the years, you do obviously come across critics who say, but sailing is such a privilege. And I do appreciate for many it is. And particularly I find in the UK, there's still quite a hierarchical structure as to how we can access sailing in comparison to, say, Italy and France. And, you'll get 600 optimists on Lake Garda on a weekend. And there's a lot of heavy subsidy coming in, obviously, from the French government and local councils within France, for example. So I think there's still work to be done here in the UK on how accessible it truly can become. But I think what sailing does do, I think because of the international element of it, as you've described yourself, there are communities who de facto, by virtue of their history and their cultural relationship to water and the sea, for whom this can be an exceptionally exciting opportunity, as you described with the young people of Soweto, where it's about it's a can. I think that's the biggest underlying factor that I've come across with different organizations, particularly that focus on youth, is giving a young person the opportunity to say, I can. And it's overcoming what is so unknown, very scary at times. And for the best predictions, you still can't predict the outcome, even for the best of us, understanding passage planning and weather systems, etc. There's still an element of you just don't know, but you've got to be prepared. It's the mindset, I think, that it cultivates beyond what actually it is that you're doing. Obviously, the two go hand in hand, but it's what it sort of fertilizes in your sense of self, which gives, I think, sailing its potency. And of course, it's outside and it's in the fresh air and it's dynamic and it's exercise and your body's so engaged physically, your mind's so engaged. So you can understand how it's transformative. And I think there's not necessarily a battle still to be won, but there's still a much broader understanding to be had as to, aside from the red trousers and aside from the yacht club vibe, which I appreciate makes up a big part of our sailing communities globally, at its fundamental rawness, there's a beauty to it, which I think comes from the humbleness that it gives one, that you are within an environment so much bigger than yourself and you just have to be there. It goes back to our first snippets, which is about being incredibly present. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. I think the most important thing is when I was president of the Sail Training Association, we had the two schooners, Churchill and Miller. We take these youngsters for a fortnight. Now, first thing we did once they signed on, up the mast. Up the mast is frightening. First time you do it, it is frightening. Now, we made sure we got them safe, but nevertheless, they had to do it. Some of them might have climbed a lamppost before, but they really had never done anything like this. And I always felt the most important thing. Occasionally, I used to sail on the boats just to keep myself in touch, really, go as mate or navigator. I always felt the most important thing was, as they came down, you just walked past and just quietly said, "Well done," and walked on. In some cases, no one ever said well done to them in their lives. They'd only been told they were a disaster. And you could see them standing there saying, "Yeah, I did that." Now, at the end of 2 weeks, they'd be doing the hokey cokey up there on the yardarms and terrifying me. But fact is, they'd realized that what they thought were their limits weren't their limits. They'd been pushed beyond what they thought they were capable of. And that opens up thinking, well, if I do that, I can do that as well. And that, I think, is the breakthrough I always look for with people. There was a lady who did the first race. She was in an advertising firm in London. At the end of the race, I said, "Oh, are you going back to them?" They'd sort of given her leave of absence. She said, "No." I said, "Right, what are you going to do?" She said, "No, I've got sufficient confidence now. I'm going to set up my own business." And she turned up in Liverpool when we had a race a few years later. I said, "How's it going?" She said, "I can't tell you, Robin." She said, "I'm my own boss. I'm earning twice as much. I'm having much more fun in life. And it was all down to the fact I did the dipper race." I thought, I need to bottle that somehow. And it was so satisfying to hear her say it. I thought, right, you're contributing more to our society. But it's because of being stretched beyond what you thought you were capable of. And that, I think, is the big lesson everyone learns.
It's incredibly poignant and it's very moving because I think, we talked for a moment there about young people, but actually, as you well know, you've got to be over a certain age to get on a clipper boat for various reasons. And not least insurance, I imagine. But actually, it goes just to, again, how human it is, regardless of your age or circumstance. Firstly, having courage for a lot of people to put yourself in a context which is terrifying. For a lot of people who may never have sailed before, being on the water is scary. And then to have achieved something truly extraordinary, which most people will never, ever, ever do. We're talking about only 7,000 people really plus so far who will ever have done something similar, plus, professional racing crews. But I think firstly, it's the courage for people to opt themselves into that experience, number one. So credit to them entirely. And also being open-hearted about it and being vulnerable, because I think in those circumstances, you do get pushed out of your comfort zone on every level, but it also is for yourself to absorb that into a bigger experience. I imagine there's a small group of people who get off and say, cool, okay, great, back to the day job. But for the most part, I understand they'd be changed. Regardless of your age or demographic, I think it's an experience within life that we can all still be put into context or put ourselves into context where we stretch ourselves, where we say, this is scary, but I'm still going to go there to see what I can find on the other side of it. It's commendable, is all I can say.
Well, I think it works. Well, I know it works. If we could get more people doing it, more recognition that going to sea isn't necessarily yachting. That's the word that they constantly throw at it. Oh, it's yachting, and that's just for the elite. It isn't like that at all. I mean, there's 2.6 million boat owners in Britain. If it was elite, we'd be the wealthiest country on the planet. We're not. I think it's getting over that. You know, I said to that lady at the BBC, I said, have you ever been to a sailing club? No, what's that? Go and look at a sailing club. That's where the strength of British yachting is. The people who are members of sailing clubs, they're not members of some big yacht club. These are people who are actually going there through enthusiasm and nothing more to share their sport with others.
Mm.
It's not a social thing. Oh, they might have the odd barbecue, but it's not posh. It's out there sailing because they enjoy sailing. It was quite interesting. When I was on the lottery, we supported a yacht club that wanted to expand. Many years later, I used to have a radio program here in the South, and I went back to that yacht club, and I was interviewing there was an international regatta going on, and I was interviewing some really top sailors. I looked over and I saw a whole lot of youngsters with some oppies. And I said, an optimist, for those who don't know, is just a small little boat that you can learn to sail on. Ben Ainsley learned on that, for instance. And I said, what's going on there? Oh, it's Thursday evening. This is when we offer sailing to anyone. So, what? No, you don't have to be parents don't have to be a member of the club. You don't have to. It's, I think, £5, no, it was less, to come down here and get free tuition for sailing. And I've subsequently met people who've taken up sailing as a career who started there. I thought, yes, this is why I supported their application for the money. And wow, are they using it beneficially? It's fantastic to see. And I don't think people realize that actually lots of clubs will have programs like that. They feel they want to put this back in. People feel I can't go and ask.
I think it's a huge thing, isn't it? Being able to access, as you said, or perhaps separate sailing from yachting is a very important aspect of it.
Well, I think yachting's got the idea that it's just for the elite and wealthy. Sailing, let's face it, until about 100 years ago, most of the ships that went round the coast, the coasters, the fishermen, they were all sailing boats. They weren't elite.
Well, it was born out of profession and necessity, sailing. I mean, this was how you did your fishing. It was how you did your oyster dredging. It wasn't for pleasure. That came quite a lot later, as you're aware.
That's right. And I think this is where the misunderstanding lies. Quite often I'll get people saying to me, oh, well, of course, you're lucky. You had a privileged background. I said, yes. Did I? Well, you know, you're not working class. I said, aren't I? How do you define working class? Oh, well, when you went to university, I said, I didn't go to university. Is a student at university elite or working class? Well, they can't answer that. Is an apprentice working class? Oh, yes. Well, then I'm working class. Oh, I hadn't realized that was my choice.
Mm.
Never regretted it.
It really, but I think it's an important conversation because it really gets in the way. I've spent a lot of time, certainly over the last 4 years in particular, around racing on the continent, particularly when it comes to young people and racing teams, etc. And the mentality around sailing is quite different there because it is something which is perhaps, I wouldn't say necessarily newer, but again, it's less hierarchical. And unfortunately, that conversation and that deliberation, I feel, gets in the way of getting people out sailing here, just using the water, experiencing the water, because it has still got this somewhat unpalatable heritage of being, like you said, yachty, and that does, turn a lot of people off even accessing the sport, which is a great pity.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, the reason why yachting as such took off in Britain is because back in the reign of Charles II and his brother, they took it up. And therefore, all the other nobles decided they better do it as well to keep in with the king. So initially in Britain, it was an elitist sport. What people have forgotten is in the 1950s, when I was young, the great Build a Boat at Home campaign started, the car-top dinghies and such, like the mirror dinghy. You could
Yeah.
do this at home. And there was a huge expansion in sailing. You know, every reservoir had a sailing club. These aren't special places where people just want to go and practice their sport, just as same as any other sport. But I think there are plenty of sports more expensive than sailing at that level. But that's where the strength of British sailing is. That's where it comes from.
Mm. Well, it's just the sailing clubs, as you mentioned. I think they're a lot more low ego and practical. It's just about getting wet and cold, isn't it, Robin?
I always feel when people doing the clipper race, I said, look, one thing you're going to learn is that when things turn nasty, you can't switch channels to a program. You're there, you're going to live through it. There's nothing to stop that cold water going down the back of your oilskins at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
We're not feeling particularly good. Uh, but this is what strengthens you.
Yeah. But that's a really, really important point too. And I think reflecting it even on, let's say, modern society, which sounds incredibly stereotypical and cliche, but is our ability over the last decades to change whenever we want to. If we don't like something, we can get out. If we don't want to do something, we don't do it. And to a degree, that's done with flippancy. And on other levels, great. Let's not waste our time and energy on something that we don't deem valuable or delivering fruit. But in that context of sailing is born that resilience because you, like you described, once you're, even offshore, and that could be in the middle of a reservoir rather than on the beach, or it could be in the Solent, the Channel, the Atlantic, the Pacific. You just have to do as you described. So I think when it comes to stretching yourself, it's by virtue of being captive. It's that captive resilience that's bred by being unable to get off at times. Even if it's just, half a mile back to shore, you still have to get there.
That's absolutely right. And, you decide you're going to cross an ocean. You might be at sea for 4 weeks. You cannot get off. But then when you reach your destination, you've done something. There's something to be proud of. And I often say to the crews, this isn't the easy thing in life. This is quite a tough challenge. But why do the easy things? Where's the satisfaction? When you do something that's tough and achieve it, you don't have to boast about it. You know you've done it. You don't have to shout it to everyone. But that's where real satisfaction comes.
I think it's poignant, and will go on to sort of the element of Clipper and the environment and perhaps how you've changed some of the fleets over time. But on that point, because it's something that's really beautiful, and I rewrote it down yesterday that you said, and it's incredibly simple and in some ways well trodden. Forgive me, not to discredit it coming from your mouth, but that real satisfaction comes from achieving something difficult. And I think in a world which is geared so much towards, quick fixes and dopamine hits, it really is a sort of crude reminder as to just how hard won great things really are. And they come from that degree of stretch, don't they? And I think to a degree, in some ways, of the romanticism, we talked about it being something that most people don't do. But I'd love to get your opinion on this, actually, because Skip Novak was the previous podcast guest, and I appreciate you know him well. And I asked the same question of him because it's something I'm somewhat fascinated with, is that have we lost something over time in how sort of serious we take things? Sailing could be one of them. I don't know, golf or mountaineering could be another, precluding safety. But the world has changed quite significantly, certainly between, let's say, 69, you getting home here to Falmouth, half a mile away, and today where we have all the kit, we have all the information really we could need. Have we lost a degree of romanticism around it? And I think I refer also to the way that you talk about, these greyhounds, referring really to the Amokas who are now racing around the world in 75 days flat. To what extent are they losing something? Are we losing something in the way that we do conduct ourselves on the water these days? Is there a different romanticism? Is romanticism a mindset? Or have we flat out lost an essence of the way things can be when we set off offshore?
2 days ago, I had a Zoom meeting with Skip was in it, Stan Honey, who heads up World Sailing Safety Committee, a very, very good navigator. I mean, everyone wants him when they're racing. Roger Nielsen, quite a few people, we've all been at this for a long time. And this subject came up. I think it was Stan who brought it up. It could have been Skip. How people are less self-reliant these days, whereas we had to be self-reliant. If something went wrong on my boat, I couldn't ask for help.
Mhm.
Nowadays, comparatively minor things go wrong and they're pressing the panic button and asking for the lifeboat to come and rescue them.
Mhm.
And it's something we discussed. So we're in 100% agreement that people tend to opt out far too early nowadays. They're not so self-reliant.
Okay.
And I thought, they're absolutely right. The United States Coast Guard came out with something quite interesting a couple of months back,
Huh?
saying that 80, I think it was 80% of the rescues they have to do weren't necessary.
Wow.
People just gave up too easily. And if you talk to the RNLI, you'll probably find there's an awful lot of people, they've gone out for the day fishing, they've run out of petrol. Oh, come on.
Mm,
And you expect the lifeboat to be launched. It costs about £7,000 every time they launch a lifeboat.
at
It does
least.
depend on charity. You just say, come on, what were you doing? You're a bloody disgrace, frankly. And don't go boasting about you've called the lifeboat out because people like me are ready to deck you for it. No, that's the last resort. You don't bother the lifeboat unless you have to. You're asking these people to risk their lives because you've been stupid.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry, I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. But it's interesting, we had unanimity on this, and all of us have done a lot of sailing. We're just saying this is where we really ought to try and create a situation where if you have to call out the lifeboat, you should be ashamed of yourself. There will be times when it is necessary. We get that. Sometimes it is damaging. But last night I was reading a report of a boat lost its rudder in the middle of the Bay of Biscay.
Uh-huh.
And they sent out a mayday, but they said, look, we're all right. We don't need rescuing at the moment. Managed after a couple of days to sort out a way of fixing the rudder, temporary rudder. They sailed themselves to safety.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Those are the people we should be praising. Someone who's prancing around saying, I called out a lifeboat, aren't I clever? You're not clever. You're an idiot.
I find it refreshing that you connected resilience with romanticism there, because initially I was thinking, we want to be, up to the hilt in safety. Of course, that's important. But people such as yourself, you're a great example by virtue of being right here, right now. But you didn't need it. And I appreciate we're all a subject of our context and sign of the times. But there is and again, to your point, Skip agreeing, is that, the idea of sailing in the first place, certainly for him, was to get away from life on shore and those stresses and those strains. And the joy would be to have a break from that way of living. And yet, to a degree, we've kind of replicated that intensity and that always onness, albeit in a very different environment. And I appreciate Skip's the first to say, of course, I've got Starlink and I can, run my business offshore, etc., etc. And of course, we can see the utility of it. But I think something that really brought it home, and just humour me for a moment, Robin, because after dinner last year, my father shared some letters actually between my grandfather and yourself. And I had to laugh on this very topic. This was back in 2008. And my grandfather was a intrepid sailor in his own right. And he had done various offshore passages. He got a 36-foot Saltram Saga, which you may know is a Plymouth-built canoe hold boat, about 11 tons. So she's heavy for a 36-footer. My grandfather was writing to you for some advice on a passage that he was planning, and that was Chichester, where he was based, to Fremantle in Australia. And he'd written to you a couple of paragraphs and just sort of says, Dear Robin, I know that you've done this passage, obviously over to Australia. Got any tips? And if I'd responded to somebody, it would have been a Bible, tips and bearings and whatever else. And it made me smile so much. And this is said with complete affection. You've got one paragraph here in reply. Dear Mr. Manvell, it says, can't give you the exact route, moved house, everything's in storage, fine. Basically, though, and you actually start this paragraph with basically, which in itself is just fantastic because it is so basic. Basically goes on to say east a bit, southeast a bit, east a bit more, south a bit, don't hit that thing, and then you're done. And I think there's a degree of advising somebody on a passage of 14,000 miles from the UK to Australia with such simplicity, which in itself speaks to a mindset of just getting on with it. You know your boat's seaworthy, you know you can sail, head off, be safe, watch that bit, and you'll arrive in Australia as planned. And it was really, really quite refreshing to read it. And I think goes back to your point on resilience. The favourite sentence in this, and I do mean it was a short paragraph response. The secret is to keep north of the lows and south of the highs. Yours sincerely, Robin.
True. Did he do it?
he was writing this letter to you at 86 years old. And
Mhm.
a couple of years prior, he'd gone down to Cape Town with the intention of going to Australia. He got to Cape Town, unfortunately, got a little bit unwell, was in hospital, brought the boat back. So at 86 years old, he was planning his next passage. And honestly, Robin, talking to the family, they sort of talked him down doing that all the way around to Australia at 86, perhaps for the crew as much as for him. But I think it speaks only again to the audaciousness and intrepidness that was my grandfather planning to do that sort of 14,000-mile passage at 86. But it was just so refreshing to read the simplicity of your advice. Hey, here are a couple of tips, get going. And today we would have just experienced something so different.
Well, it was, well, we're going to do it. He needs to understand it. And, that would take a book of things you need to understand, weather, of course, being dominant. But you say, look, it's like this, but it's the weather that's going to make the difference. Ocean racing particularly, people say, oh, well, the quickest route is what? The straight line. No, it isn't. The quickest route is one that makes use of the weather.
Mm.
So remember in a Whitbread race, Peter Blake won every leg of it. And in the last leg, he won it again. And the boat that came second and sailed further, but not as effectively. And that was the
Right there.
difference. And so, ocean racing is about meteorology.
Mm.
And people, and these days you've got it. You can get every 6 hours, you can get an update on the weather and 10 days in advance, which is why people are a lot faster now because they can, tactically work out where best to put their boat. We couldn't.
Mm.
But does it make it easier? Yes. On the other hand, everyone's at the same level, so it's not easy for this one against that one because they've all got the information.
Yeah, sure, sure. But I think it's, again, I think to underline it, I appreciate and it's refreshing to hear, let's say, all of you learned sailors talking about the same topic so recently, because I think it is. I think you're right. I think there is an element of not just romanticism. We're all wanting to experience something beautiful and test our own limits, but actually it does come down to where your limitation is and not actually where it is, but where your perceived limitation is and what you're capable of. And I suppose that goes for most people and most achievement is that psychologically we'll tap out a lot earlier than we really need to, which perhaps precludes a lot of achievement in some degree and a lot of experience.
Yes, I think so. And I was reading an article by Nikki Henderson last night. I mean, she was one of my skippers.
She
Very,
was. Very good
very,
one.
very good skipper. And she was repeating something I've always said, if you want to do something, get to sea. The time on the water is what you want. Seamanship you learn through your hands. You can buy books, it helps, but you learn it through experience. And she was saying it again, and I was very pleased she was, because she'll get attention, and I hope people will listen to what she said, because that is what it's all about.
And I think it's something which you can also theoreticize about is, yeah, get out on the water and do it. But actually, almost by Nikki, and she's an incredible sailor, and you're absolutely right, alongside people like Wendy Tuck and Alex Thompson, these are all ex-Clipper sailors, hey? And, Nikki's a fantastic example of somebody incredibly accomplished at a young age, certainly within the Clipper circuit. It's coming back to you, her verbalizing it, because she's imbued it. I mean, this is something that she now deeply, deeply understands. And she's, proven to herself and the rest of us time and time again is that time on the water arms you with a multitude of opportunity, heart, soul, and technically. It really is one of the most pronounced experience I believe one can have in life. Appreciate it's not for everybody, but it's lucky us. Hey, Robin, that we get to taste it.
Well, I'd agree. I remember when I was running the STA, the Duke of Edinburgh was our patron, and every year he'd give us a forward to our report. I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He said, look, the most influential experiences in life aren't necessarily the most comfortable ones.
Mm.
Now, I've paraphrased it, but that's where you probably learn the most.
Absolutely.
God, I wish I'd written that because it's so true.
But I think you did a bit more than write it, Robin. You know it. You were one of the first people really on a mass scale to prove to a global society, really, that that's exactly what it takes. It's the discomfort. It's the meeting yourself in the dark. It really is when you are entirely on your own. And that can mean different things to different people. For some, it won't be in the middle of an ocean when your self-steering fails or heavens, you get knocked down off the Cape of Good Hope. But it's meeting yourself in the dark is not something often you choose either, because you might set off sailing around the world, but you don't know how hard it's going to get for you. You just don't know yet. But again, to your point, it's coming out the other side of it and being able to say, okay, cool. Yeah, I did that.
I think it's best to assume it's going to be hard
Mm,
and plan for that. And then it might not be quite so hard after all. But at least you've mentally prepared yourself for the fact this is not going to be easy.
mm,
And therefore, I've got to deal with it.
mm,
When you plan a voyage around the world, and I was planning for 300 days, what do I need? And I made a long list of all the things I needed. I left two things off the list. One was razor blades, and
mhm.
I've had ever since. And the other was solder, because I needed to repair my radio and I didn't have any solder. So I melted down the bottom of bulbs, light bulbs, because they weren't working. And I almost got the radio working again, but every time I pressed transmit, the fuse went. So I ended
Mm.
up putting a nail in it. I can see every communication person in the world go, "You did what?" But I was desperate.
Was this that nice posh Marconi radio, high frequency radio you're talking about, Robin?
It is. Unfortunately, it got wet. It worked very well until it got wet and it stopped working. I could listen. I couldn't transmit. Frustrating. I was picking up the British Antarctic Survey. They're very close to some of my frequencies. And I was desperately trying to call them to report me. I'm okay, you know. I could never quite get through to them. They kept
Mm.
chatting in Antarctica, which was a bit frustrating, really.
Wow. It really gives me goosebumps actually, just listening to you talking about it and sort of place yourself even rudimentarily into that situation and think, crikey, that's really where you were and what was going on. I mean, Robin, you were one of the first people ever to see the world's oceans in one continuous unbroken line. How has that changed your sense of, let's say, the planet and its fragility and its rhythm and its limits, and combine that perhaps with your appreciation for, northern latitude sailing up around the Arctic? How have you seen things changed?
If you get close to land, you start seeing the rubbish. A lot of plastic. Never had that 50 years ago. It wasn't so much plastic. And also, since then, we've had the Marpol treaties, which forbid dumping rubbish in the sea. And frankly, if you think you're going to get away with it, you won't. Someone will report you. And rightly, you store your rubbish, you give it to the authorities when you reach port. But I can remember going from Cape Hatteras up to Atlantic City once in the States, and it was appalling. The rubbish in the sea was absolutely atrocious. It all come off the land. It's because people ashore just toss things toss it on the street. I used to say, go past the Kentucky Fried Chicken shop, and see how many people just leave their wrappers on the pavement. Well, that's not the attitude. We can't live like that. We've got to be more careful. I mean, this microplastics now is a big problem.
Mhm.
Um, what are we going to do about it? Well, sailors can't do anything about it except support the scientists who notice them, because the sailor won't see a microplastic. All we can do is support the scientists saying this is an issue. Yeah, agree. Well, how do we stop it? What do
Mhm.
we do about it? There's so much out there that we see. I mean, global warming is perhaps, well, the effect of global warming has already been felt. You can deny it if you want, but the fact of the matter is the weather patterns are changing. And we can see it. The seawater temperatures are rising. That's raising the temperature of the air. It's becoming less stable. Therefore, we don't get more hurricanes, but we get more extreme hurricanes. We should be worrying. I mean, the biggest threat is the Gulf Stream. We need to think about this. If that stops, Britain becomes Arctic. So there is a very good reason for trying to make sure the Gulf Stream continues and the conveyor which takes that water back down the Atlantic levels. These are things we should all be worrying about. And for people, America needs to worry about it, because if we get much more ice melt, an awful lot of America floods. It's low lying. Same here for that matter. Where I live in Portsmouth, come up another meter, whoopsie, I better get my house ready to float. I happen to live in a city which is doing something about it, but preparing to accept that the sea levels will rise, doing a lot of good work on it. But the fact of the matter is, though, this is something we better take seriously. I can see it in Greenland. You can see where the glaciers used to be. They're not there now. They've gone. So, hey guys, we need to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
What glacier now is in the sea. The seawater level is rising. What are we going to do about it? We built the Thames Barrier for 1,000 years. Not now. Might be 100 years
Mm-hmm.
because of what's happened in the last 30, 40 years since it was built. It is that acceleration of the change that we need to worry about.
You mentioned that I appreciate, crudely, but it's only just speaking verbatim, is that obviously sailors can't do very much. But I think that unique position that you're describing is something that we share, in that we can see a lot of the ocean environment, and certainly we are at liberty of the weather systems much more than perhaps purely a life on land. I mean, during your early voyages, and you've described it just yourself, there was hardly a sign, I imagine, of human impact beyond the shipping lanes. And at best, they were less busy than they are now, we'll say. But obviously, detritus and otherwise is well known across our ocean waters. You think almost, I'm almost thinking about your Jules Verne attempt, right, with Peter Blake, and you'd hit what are actually called UFOs, unidentified floating objects, which did tear a hole in your starboard hull, right, on your catamaran. And you had, what, 16 days or something nursing your boat back to safe harbour in Cape Town. I mean, this level of detritus in the water, such as shipping containers and big floating objects, are incredibly hazardous for sailing and have become more pronounced. Certainly, that in itself is quite distressing, particularly for those of us who enjoy offshore sailing. But you've also talked obviously about the climate changing, and alternating and adjusting wind patterns, sea temperatures, even storm behavior, hurricane behavior. I imagine with things like Clipper, by virtue of safety and otherwise, how has that changed any of the way you've been thinking about planning the race, for example? And how are the seas telling a different story, even over those years since 1996 when you first started?
Well, it's 30 years ago, and I think in the fleet yesterday we're going 45, 50 knots of wind. All right, they're designed for it, and they're still charging along this morning, so checked as usual. But I think what I'm more concerned about is, those are 70-foot boats. They're quite big as far as sailing yachts go. I'm more concerned about people with their 30, 35-footers who are, say, crossing over to the Caribbean. And when they do get into the bad weather now, it is more serious bad weather. And they could take a hammering. And it just worries me that people perhaps aren't taking it as seriously as they should. And we're going to start getting losses, boats disappearing. We always had boats disappear. In the early days, I knew 3 or 4 people whose boats just didn't arrive. They didn't have radios. No one knew what happened to them. They just didn't turn up. So it's always been there, but there's a lot more yachts now. And a lot more people making longer voyages. Great. Pleased about that. And with a good, well-found, strongly built boat, you should be okay. But do you know how to handle it in those conditions? What's the best way of making sure your boat's safe when you've got big waves bashing into you? How do I make this boat safe? You don't do it by buying a boat saying, I'm going to cross the Atlantic. You do it by going sailing with other people to start with and building up your experience. That will help you choose a better boat from what you've learned. And then making 1 or 2 good, sensible voyages, not too long maybe, but enough for you to pick up what I really need, how my boat behaves. Don't go to see if it's going to blow 4, 6, or 7. That's a stupid thing to do. One thing goes wrong, you could be in trouble. To see when it's comfortable. No one goes to sea in a gale, unless they're stupid. But if you cross oceans, you're going to get caught by gales. Learn as much as you can about your boat before you face that. Bearing in mind, it's probably going to happen.
Robin, continuing on the point of what sailors can actually do, you have made some amendments to your Clipper boats over the decades. And in particular, let's say the Clipper 70 racing fleet, which, as you said, is built to withstand the toughest conditions on the planet. And you have made some amendments to those boats, such as the hydro generators, as an example. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about those tweaks to your own fleet?
I got into a wonderful discussion with an American lady who was busy preaching to me about the environment. And I thought, America, put your own house in order first. Don't come along. And I said, you've got to, if you really want to help the environment, you should be thinking how you can make it sensible for big business to pay more attention to it. And she said, well, like what? I said, well, I'm fitting all my boats with hydrogen generators. What's that? I said, it's almost like an outboard motor in reverse. It's got a little propeller and you put it in the water. And as the boat goes through the water, that propeller turns, it creates electricity. I said, well, that's good, but why is it so effective? Because I think on any single race in the Clipper race, it will save me £50,000 worth of diesel that I'd otherwise have to use on the generators. Therefore, there is a commercial benefit to my doing it, apart from the fact I think it's the right thing to do. There's a commercial impetus to do it. I said, that's what you should be looking for. Find those commercial impetuses for business and governments. Say, actually, we can save money if we do this. And we know it's the right thing to do. I'm not sure I actually got through on that one.
Well, I think you're getting through to a lot of others, Robin. I mean, we can't save them all, let's say.
My crews like it. I mean, they feel that they are doing something.
But I think it's important. It's an important factor on two levels. The first is the commerciality. I think with the best will in the world, and obviously having run Clean Sailors now for about 5 years, there's an awareness of all of us wanting to do the right thing, but the preclusion is almost always value. And how much is it going to cost any one of us to do something differently and better on one level? So you're absolutely right. It has to make good business sense on an individualistic and also on a collective level in order to make better environmental choices and also the right environmental choices. There's also a lot of noise and a lot of contested solutions, electric, for example, being one of them, which we don't necessarily have to go into now. They actually do cumulatively add up if we're all doing them, making those small changes. And I think that the second order is there's, with Clipper in particular, you are taking, as we said, you've taken 7,000 people out onto the open water in these environments. Those 700 per race, let's say, on your 10, 11 boats are all experiencing something, getting closer to the ocean, number one. So you're more likely to protect your natural environment if you've experienced it. And if you've experienced it to a degree of absolute awe, even more so. And secondarily, Clipper is that platform, obviously, because it has such a high profile now, not least with the crew members, but just nationally, globally, in that, the projects, the partnerships, the initiatives, whether it's around collecting ocean data or supporting people from less advantaged communities getting out into the boats themselves, that it's all about doing something bigger than just sailing. And I appreciate the intention initially was just to get people sailing, but there's so much goodness that has come from setting up an organization which does that. And the way that you're analyzing the opportunity to create environmental advantage has to be commercial. I think it's the only way to address it. And as I said, by virtue of the fact that those 700 crews, each time you do a race, they're also taking back their experiences elsewhere, taking them home. So it's a really great platform in that sense also.
Yeah, no, I do find the crews too are really genuinely interested. When we first fitted the hydro generators, it took a bit of time to get the people to use it. And I was thinking of all sorts of ways of, say, I'm going to measure the amount of fuel you've got at the beginning and the end of a way, see how much you used. I haven't had to do that now. People have got it. This is a good thing to be doing. And I think most people do think positively like that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to hit the politicians with it.
Mm.
That's the people who ultimately will make the decisions that matter on this. But I have seen over, say, the last 10 years, a growing appreciation, hey, this is a problem. And you, Mr. Politician, you better not speak against it because you're a bloody fool of yourself. Or I can think of one big one at the moment. Doesn't matter.
Robin, you've seen the ocean at its most brutal and its most beautiful. And given all that you've witnessed from, that Golden Globe to your polar expeditions and your offshore ocean races, what are you most hopeful for the future of our seas? Or do you fear we're running out of time on things?
No, I think there is a movement now. I think it's gathering weight
Mm-hmm.
to do something about the rising air temperatures of the planet. And I applaud that. It's not as fast as we want,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think you can turn the tap off instantly. I mean, you take what China's doing, it's really making a big effort. Get rid of coal fire. Right, still got some that it started building a while back. But look at where it's going now with solar and wind energy, the right direction. If China can do it, And of course, there they make a decision at the top, and everyone obeys. But it's happening in China. They're building some incredibly big wind farms now, really enormous blades. They're doing it. India's moving into it. So if these countries can do it, then we should be doing it. But actually, I think in a way we're lagging. We need to do more. Britain, on the whole, is it's not the worst by far now. No, we've done a lot. We could do more. I'd love to see us use tidal power more. So much of it. Trouble is, you can't see it. And I think politicians think if they put up windmills, they will say, "Oh, look, we're doing something useful." Whereas if you put something underwater to create electricity, which is much more reliable, you can't see it. So, yeah, this is the way we should be going in this country. When you look at the amount of the tides we've got in the country, we can produce electricity non-stop. It's only very at high and low water where it stops producing. Doesn't matter if there's a high pressure and the wind farms aren't working. The tides are still working. I think we should be focusing on that. We did have 2 companies doing it, but they got bought by German companies. What do they know that we don't?
How to do things with speed and efficiency, Robin, apparently.
Correct.
If you could leave one message, all of us, Robin, about, let's say, the ocean, from the man who first sailed it entirely alone, what would you want us to remember, to change, to protect, to rediscover, or to fight for even?
I think there's 2 points, really. One would say, be in awe of the ocean, but don't be terrified of it. If you're terrified of it, don't go to sea. If you're in awe of it, you're going to be more cautious. That's a good thing. So that's one aspect of it, because I want everyone to sail. And the other one is sailors. When we start setting up parks at sea to protect the underwater environment, most sailors said, great, we are environmental. But that's why we go sailing. And I think sailors as a sport, and there's probably 5-6 million of us who actually take it up, could, if we got united, have a greater effect on the politicians and on ideas and business.
Well, Bristol, for example, just right round the corner, you appreciate what that tidal range is like there. It's wild.
Huge. Go north, north of Scotland. Strong tides. I actually had 14 knots on Suhaili's GPS once.
Wow.
Suhaili does not do 14 knots.
No, that's even stronger than, the Alderney race, for example. That's pretty excessive.
Yeah, that was excessive, but that's right up the north.
What power?
Yeah, I was shooting it on. I was loving it.
You're going with it, Robin. Shrewd, very shrewd.
You even take, I think they're experimenting south of St. Catherine's now in the Isle of Wight. There's strong tides there. Portland Bill, Lizard, Start Point, strong tides everywhere. You should be using them.
It's incredibly consistent, and also, I wouldn't say free, sounds very crude, but it's always on and always available.
The great thing about its consistency is the tides, high water is at different times. So that one stopped for an hour, but that one's still whirring.
Still spinning, yeah.
By the time that one stopped, this one's whirring again.
Very true.
Independent.
Dear Robin, I have to say that being here in Falmouth, I was reflecting on your book last night, which obviously you know well, and I'm hoping most people have read, which is A World of My Own by Sir Robin Knox-Johnston. But being here, obviously in Falmouth myself, and the last page is incredibly poignant because obviously it's a photograph of yourself.
Yes.
Stepping off onto our fair shores here in Cornwall. And I wanted to end on this one point, which also always makes me feel quite emotional, honestly, and not least because I can see it right now. And you write, on Pendennis Point, I could see the sunlight reflecting on the lines of parked cars, and on the front, people waving to us. We were nearly there, and that pint of beer was almost in my hand when the Harbour Master's launch came bursting through the melee, and I was told that the Sunday Times had established the finishing line between Pendennis Point and Black Rock. At that moment, another competitor nearly dropped out. I had left Falmouth between Black Rock and St Anthony Head, and saw no reason why I should not take the same route coming in. And I said so in terms that were unfortunately picked up by the BBC TV microphones at the time. I can believe that of you, Robin. Nevertheless, showing more forbearance than I usually do, I wore round to make another tack to the west. Half an hour later, at 3:25 p.m., I crossed the finish line and a cannon fired. I got goosebumps. The first people to board were Her Majesty's Customs and Excise officers from Falmouth. As they jumped across, the senior officer, trying to keep a straight face, asked the time-honoured question, "Where from?"
Falmouth. Terrible mistake, because it meant I hadn't made an international voyage, because I hadn't stopped anywhere, and I'd taken duty free before I left, which I shouldn't have done. And briefly, he talked a bit more with mirth than anything about charging me duty, but he was joking.
Good. I wouldn't quibble with a boxer who'd just done 300 on the water, would you?
Yeah.
Robin Knox-Johnston, the famously famous, highly salted, revered, deeply respected, quote, distressingly normal, unquote. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so, so much for your time. Both proud and humbled by our conversation.
Nice talking to you, Holly. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Keep sailing.
Keep sailing yourself, sir.
Well, I was sailing Suhaili last Sunday.
Lovely.
Yeah, keep it
Beautiful
going.
spot, beautiful spot, beautiful boat. Robin, an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. You can plug your book as well. I appreciate most sailors have read it, and if not, they know about it.
Well, we young struggling authors are grateful to anyone who buys our books.
You're not only a struggling author, Robin. We've gone through your other accolades and adventures alongside. Don't try that one.